Have you ever watched a marriage die slowly, not from one big betrayal, but from 1,000 small habits that turned two people who once loved each other into complete strangers? Saint Teresa of Avila saw this. She saw it with the eyes God gave her to pierce through the surface of human relationships and witness what most people miss until it is far too late. In the 1600s, in the convents of Spain where she reformed the Carmelite order, Teresa encountered countless married women who came seeking spiritual direction. Many carried wounds they could not name. Their husbands had not hit them. Their homes had not collapsed. But something had rotted from the inside, and Teresa, with that terrifying clarity she brought to everything, identified the poison. She called them the small deaths, the habits that seem innocent at first, but grow like mold in darkness until they have consumed everything that was once alive between two people. She wrote about this in her letters to married women, in her spiritual counsels, preserved in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Avila, and in fragments of her private conferences, recorded by nuns who lived with her at San Jose. What she saw was simple and devastating. Marriage does not die from lack of love. It dies from lack of attention. And when attention dies, the door swings wide open for betrayal to walk in as if it had been invited all along. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the complete works of Saint Teresa, edited by Father Silverio de Santa Teresa and housed in the Carmelite archives in Rome, and the depositions collected during her beatification process between 1622 and 1625, which contained first-hand accounts from women she counseled. These are not popular retellings. These are original documents that most people will never read. Now, back to the information. It is cowardice, dressed as virtue. When a wife stops speaking her heart because she fears her husband's reaction, she is not preserving peace. She's allowing a wall to be built one brick at a time until neither of them can see the other anymore. Teresa knew this from watching it happen again and again. A husband comes home tired. The wife swallows her words. He grows used to her silence. She grows used to his absence. Months pass. They sit at the same table and eat the same bread, but they have become strangers who share a house. And when a stranger offers attention, offers words, offers the very thing that died at home, betrayal does not feel like sin. It feels like relief. Teresa wrote that this kind of silence is a form of abandonment. The wife abandons her husband by withdrawing. The husband abandons his wife by accepting the withdrawal. Both are guilty. Both are complicit. And both will stand before God and wonder how it all fell apart when neither of them did anything obviously wrong. Teresa's response was sharp. She said, "When you begin counting what you give and what you receive, you have already stopped loving and started trading. Marriage is not a marketplace. It is a covenant. And covenants do not function on fairness. They function on sacrifice." Teresa explained that the moment a wife begins to track her husband's failures, to remember every slight, every forgotten word, every missed gesture, she has planted a seed of bitterness that will grow faster than any weed. The husband feels the judgment even if she never speaks it. He stops trying because nothing he does is ever enough. She stops receiving because everything he does is measured against what he did not do. The space between them fills with resentment, and resentment is a fire that burns everything except itself. Teresa said that many wives come to her confessing their husband's infidelity, but when she presses deeper, she finds that the wife had been keeping a ledger of grievances for years. She had withdrawn warmth, she had withheld affection, she had treated her husband not as a partner but as a debtor who could never repay what he owed. And when another woman treated him as if he were enough, as if he were wanted, as if he mattered, he fell. Not because he was wicked, but because he was starving. 1915 by the Carmelite Fathers in Madrid. Teresa said that many marriages die because neither person has the courage to ask the simple question, "What are you thinking right now?" Instead, they assume. The wife assumes her husband is angry when he is only tired. The husband assumes his wife does not want him when she's only hurt. Assumptions multiply in silence. They grow teeth. They become facts in the mind, even though they have no basis in reality. And once an assumption hardens into belief, it is almost impossible to break. Teresa recounted a specific case. A woman came to her in 1576 at the Monastery of the Incarnation in Avila. Her husband had been cold to her for months. She was certain he had stopped loving her. Teresa asked her a single question. "Have you asked him why he is distant?" The woman admitted she had not. She was afraid of what he might say. Teresa made her promise to go home and ask. The woman did. The husband broke down. He had been struggling with a business failure. He was ashamed. He thought his wife would despise him if she knew. He had pulled away not because he stopped loving her, but because he was drowning in shame and did not want to drag her down with him. They had been living in separate hells, each assuming the other had moved on, when the truth was they were both suffering alone. Teresa said that this is how the devil works in marriages. He does not need to plant lies. He only needs to keep two people from speaking the truth. The woman had confessed that she found herself constantly comparing her husband to other men, to men who earned more, to men who spoke more kindly, to men who seemed more devout. Teresa's response was fierce. She said, "Comparison is the thief of gratitude." When you compare your husband to another man, you are not seeing your husband. You are seeing a distorted image shaped by your dissatisfaction. You are blind to his virtues because you are looking for his defects. And a man who is constantly measured against others will eventually stop trying to be himself and either become bitter or seek validation elsewhere. Teresa said that many women who came to her after their husband's infidelity admitted that they had spent years wishing their husband was someone else. They had praised other men in front of him. They had sighed when other couples walked by. They had made it clear in 1,000 small ways that he was not enough. And when a man is told long enough that he is not enough, he will find someone who tells him he is. Teresa said this is not an excuse for betrayal. Sin is always sin. But she also said that wives must examine their own hearts. If you have spent years tearing your husband down with comparisons, do not be shocked when he seeks refuge in the arms of a woman who builds him up. Teresa said that many married women came to her believing that holiness meant withdrawing from their husband's touch. They had been told by poorly formed priests that physical intimacy was a concession to weakness, something to be endured, not enjoyed. Teresa corrected this with force. She said that marriage is a sacrament, and the marital embrace is part of that sacrament. When a wife withdraws from her husband physically without cause, she is not growing in holiness. She is breaking a bond that God himself established. Teresa said that a man whose wife consistently refuses him, who treats his desire as something dirty or shameful, will begin to feel rejected, not just physically, but entirely. He will feel as though his wife does not want him, does not value him, does not see him as a man. And when that rejection becomes a pattern, when it lasts not weeks, but months or years, the vulnerability to temptation becomes overwhelming. Teresa said she had seen this repeatedly. A wife grows cold, the husband grows distant, another woman offers warmth, and suddenly the unthinkable happens. Teresa was clear. The husband's sin is his own, but the wife's coldness is also a sin against the covenant she made before God. Teresa also saw the poison of unconfessed resentment. She wrote about this in letters to several married women between 1578 and 1582. These letters are preserved in the Carmelite archives in Seville. Teresa said that many wives carry wounds from their husband that they never bring into the light. A harsh word spoken years ago, a promise broken, a moment of humiliation. These wounds fester in silence. They do not heal. They grow infected. And the wife begins to punish her husband in ways she does not even recognize. She becomes short with him. She withholds kindness. She finds fault in everything he does. She does not see that she is punishing him for a wound he may not even remember inflicting. Teresa said this is a form of hidden violence. It is violence that does not use fists, but uses silence, coldness, and withdrawal. And it is just as destructive. A man who lives with a wife who resents him but never tells him why will eventually stop trying to understand. He will give up. And when he gives up, he becomes vulnerable to anyone who offers him the mercy his wife refuses to give. Now back to the story. They speak to them as if they are children. They correct them constantly. They make it clear that they are more advanced, more holy, more pleasing to God. Teresa said this is not holiness. This is pride, dressed in religious language, and it destroys marriages faster than open sin. A husband who feels that his wife looks down on him, who feels that she sees herself as spiritually superior, will not be drawn closer to God. He will be driven away. He will resent her piety. He will associate religion with judgment. And he will seek companionship with someone who does not make him feel like a failure every time he walks through the door. Teresa said that true holiness in a wife makes a husband feel loved, not judged. It draws him closer, not pushes him away. A wife who uses her faith as a weapon has misunderstood everything. Teresa wrote about an eighth poison, and this one she called the poison of neglect. She said that many women, especially those with children, begin to see their husbands as one more responsibility rather than as a person they chose to love. The husband becomes a provider, a problem solver, a secondary concern after the children, the house, the duties of the day. Teresa said that when a man feels like he is just another item on his wife's list, when he feels that she no longer sees him, no longer desires his company, no longer lights up when he enters the room, something inside him begins to die. He does not feel loved, he feels used. And when a man feels used long enough, he will eventually seek a place where he feels wanted. Teresa said that many women are genuinely shocked when their husbands fall into infidelity. They say, "But I did everything. I kept the house, I raised the children, I managed everything." And Teresa would respond, "But did you see him? Did you desire him? Did you make him feel like he mattered not for what he did, but for who he is?" If the answer was no, then the wife had been complicit in creating the emptiness that another woman filled. The ninth poison Teresa saw was the poison of unspoken expectations. She wrote about this in a letter to a young bride in 1575, warning her of the dangers ahead. Teresa said that many wives enter marriage with a picture in their minds of what their husband should be, how he should act, what he should provide, how he should love, but they never speak these expectations out loud. They assume he knows. They assume he should just understand. And when he fails to meet these unspoken standards, they grow disappointed, then hurt, then bitter. The husband has no idea what he did wrong because he was never told what was expected. He only knows that no matter what he does, it is not enough. Teresa said this is a form of cruelty. To hold someone accountable to a standard they do not know exists is to set them up for failure. And a man who is constantly failing without understanding why will eventually stop trying. He will withdraw. He will seek peace elsewhere. And when he finds a woman who seems easier to please, who seems satisfied with who he is, he will be drawn to her like a man dying of thirst. She wrote about this in her more private notes, entries that were not meant for publication but were preserved by the nuns who copied her writings. Teresa said that many women, especially those who have been hurt or betrayed in the past, build walls around their hearts and call it wisdom. They refuse to be vulnerable. They refuse to soften. They tell themselves that hardness is protection, that coldness is strength. But Teresa said this is a lie from hell. A marriage cannot survive without vulnerability. A husband cannot love a wall. He can live next to it. He can provide for it, but he cannot connect with it. And when a man lives with a wife who will not let him in, who will not show him her heart, who treats intimacy as a weakness, he will eventually give up trying. He will stop pursuing. And when another woman offers him softness, offers him vulnerability, offers him the very thing his wife refuses to give, he will fall. Not because he is evil, but because he is human, and humans cannot survive alone. She corrected him in public. She shared private struggles with friends and family. Teresa confronted the woman directly. She said that when you humiliate your husband in public, you're not just wounding his pride. You're severing the bond of trust that holds your marriage together. A man who is mocked by his wife in front of others will begin to despise her. He will feel betrayed. He will wonder why he should remain faithful to someone who treats him with contempt. And when someone else treats him with respect, with honor, with the dignity his wife refuses to give, he will be drawn to that person with a force he cannot control. Teresa said that many women do not understand the weight of their words. They think they are just venting, just being honest, just expressing frustration. But Teresa said words have power. And a woman who tears down her husband with her tongue should not be surprised when he seeks refuge elsewhere. These accounts appear in testimonies collected during her beatification process, specifically in the depositions of women she had counseled in Segovia and Toledo. Teresa said that when a wife uses children as a tool to punish her husband, she commits a double sin. She wounds her husband and she wounds her children. The husband begins to see his own home as enemy territory. He feels ambushed. He feels that even his children have been turned against him, and the loneliness becomes unbearable. Teresa said that many men who fall into infidelity are not looking for passion. They are looking for a place where they are not under attack, a place where they can breathe, where they are wanted. And if that place is not their home, they will find it somewhere else. She said that some wives hold onto past offenses like treasures, bringing them up again and again in every argument, using them as weapons to win fights that should have been over years ago. The husband is never allowed to move past his mistakes. He is constantly reminded of his failures. Every attempt to rebuild is met with, "But remember when you..." This, Teresa said, is torture. It is a form of punishment that never ends. A man who is never forgiven will eventually stop asking for forgiveness. He will stop trying to repair. He will live in defeat. And when he meets someone who offers him a clean slate, who treats him as if he could still be good, still be wanted, still be enough, the temptation is overwhelming. Teresa said that forgiveness is not optional in marriage. It is the only thing that allows two sinners to live together without destroying each other. A wife who refuses to forgive is slowly murdering her marriage and then wondering why it died. Teresa had little patience for this. She said that when a wife turns herself into a martyr, she is not loving her husband. She is resenting him. And that resentment leaks into everything. The husband feels it. He knows he is seen as a burden, as a cross to bear, as something to be endured rather than enjoyed. And no man wants to live with someone who treats him like a punishment. Teresa said that this kind of martyrdom is a form of manipulation. It is a way of claiming moral superiority while poisoning the relationship. And it drives men away. Not just emotionally, but eventually physically. The man will seek out anyone who treats him as a gift rather than a curse. The house was never clean enough, the income never high enough, the affection never expressed in the right way. Teresa said that this kind of dissatisfaction is not about circumstances. It is about the heart. A discontented wife will drain her husband of life. He will work himself to exhaustion, trying to satisfy her, and it will never be enough. Eventually, he will stop trying. He will accept that he is a failure in her eyes. And when he does, he becomes vulnerable to any woman who seems easier to please. Teresa warned that chronic dissatisfaction is often a sign of deeper spiritual emptiness. The wife is looking to her husband to fill a void that only God can fill. And because he cannot do what only God can do, she punishes him for failing at an impossible task. 16th century Spain. She called it the poison of separate lives. Husbands and wives who lived in the same house but maintained entirely separate social circles, separate interests, separate routines. They functioned more like business partners managing an estate than like covenant partners building a life. Teresa said this was a recipe for disaster. When two people stop sharing their lives, they stop knowing each other. They become strangers who happen to share a name, and strangers do not stay faithful to each other. Faithfulness requires intimacy. It requires shared moments, shared struggles, shared joys. When those disappear, when a husband and wife have nothing in common except logistics, betrayal becomes almost inevitable, because both are lonely, both are isolated, and both are looking for connection even if they do not realize it. The 17th poison Teresa identified was the poison of using religion as a substitute for relationship. Some wives, she noticed, poured all their emotional energy into devotions, into church activities, into spiritual reading, while their marriages grew cold. They convinced themselves that this was holy, that they were choosing God over worldly concerns. Teresa called this a deception. She said that marriage is a vocation. It is a call from God. And when a wife neglects that vocation in the name of piety, she is not being holy. She is being disobedient. God does not call married women to abandon their husbands for prayer. He calls them to love their husbands through prayer. Teresa saw case after case of women who spent hours at church while their husbands sat alone at home. The wives felt righteous. The husbands felt abandoned. And eventually those husbands would find companionship elsewhere. Teresa said that a wife's first altar is her home. If she neglects that altar, all her other devotions are built on sand. They wanted their husbands to be more romantic, but would not be more affectionate. They wanted their husbands to be more spiritual, but mocked their attempts to pray. They wanted their husbands to be more communicative, but shut down every conversation. Teresa said this is hypocrisy. Marriage requires both people to bend, both people to grow, both people to sacrifice their pride. A wife who demands that her husband change while she remains rigid is not seeking unity. She is seeking dominance. And dominance kills love. It replaces partnership with power struggle. And in a power struggle, everyone loses. The husband will either submit and grow to resent her, or he will rebel and seek freedom elsewhere. She described this as the danger of a wife forming deep emotional bonds with other men, whether through correspondence, through friendships, or through spiritual direction that crosses appropriate boundaries. Teresa was particularly concerned about married women who sought male confessors or spiritual directors and then began sharing with them the intimate details of their marriages, details they would not share with their husbands. She said this creates a dangerous intimacy. The woman begins to feel more connected to this other man than to her husband. She begins to seek his approval, his understanding, his comfort. The husband senses the shift, even if nothing physical has happened. He feels displaced. He knows that his wife's heart has turned elsewhere, and the wound this causes is deep. Teresa said that many physical betrayals begin as emotional ones. A wife shares her heart with someone who is not her husband. She receives comfort and attention that should have been directed toward her marriage, and eventually the emotional intimacy seeks physical expression. Teresa warned that a wife must guard her heart fiercely. She must not allow any man except her husband to occupy the intimate spaces of her soul. She wrote about women who had been taught, either by their families or by distorted religious instruction, that men were inherently brutish, dangerous, or spiritually inferior. These women entered marriage with contempt already in their hearts. They saw their husbands not as partners, but as necessary evils. They tolerated them, they managed them, but they did not honor them. Teresa said that when a wife despises masculinity, she cannot love her husband, she can only endure him. And a man who is endured rather than loved will eventually seek a woman who actually wants him. Teresa emphasized that God made men and women different for a reason. Those differences are meant to complement each other, not to create hierarchy or contempt. A wife who cannot celebrate her husband's masculinity, who cannot honor the ways he differs from her, has already planted the seeds of betrayal. Teresa's response was recorded by Sister Ana de San Bartolome, who was with Teresa during her final years. Teresa said that sometimes a marriage dies not from any single poison, but from the slow accumulation of many small deaths. She said the woman had been faithful in the outward duties, she had kept the house, she had raised the children, she had maintained respectability. But she had stopped seeing her husband as a man with a soul, with needs, with wounds, with desires. She had turned him into a function. And when you turn a person into a function, you kill the relationship. The husband had not been blameless, but the wife had been complicit. She had let the intimacy die through 1,000 small acts of negligence. She had assumed he would always be there. She had taken him for granted. She had stopped pursuing him, stopped desiring him, stopped making him feel wanted. And when another woman did those things, when another woman looked at him as if he mattered, he fell, not because he was wicked, but because he was starving for something his wife had stopped providing years ago. The husband who breaks his vows stands guilty before God, but she also said that many wives will stand before God and give an account for the ways they starved their husbands of love, of attention, of honor, of affection, and then wondered why their husbands sought those things elsewhere. She said that marriage is not a passive state. It is an active choice made every single day. A choice to see, to pursue, to honor, to forgive, to desire. And when that choice stops being made, when a wife decides that she has done enough, that she has earned the right to coast, that her husband should just be grateful for what he has, the marriage is already dying. Betrayal is just the final symptom of a disease that started years before. The wife was devastated and wanted to know if there was any hope for the marriage. Teresa's response was preserved in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Salamanca. She said that healing was possible, but only if both the husband and wife were willing to face the truth. The husband had to own his sin completely, no excuses, no blame shifting. But the wife also had to examine her own heart. She had to ask herself the hard questions. Had she been present? Had she been warm? Had she pursued her husband, or had she assumed he would always be there? Had she honored him, or had she treated him with contempt? Had she forgiven past wounds, or had she used them as weapons? Teresa said that most wives in this situation want to be seen only as victims, and they are victims. Betrayal is a profound violation. But Teresa insisted that if the marriage was going to heal, the wife could not afford the luxury of victimhood alone. She had to be willing to see her own contributions to the emptiness that made the betrayal possible. This was not about excusing the husband. This was about facing the full truth. And the full truth, Teresa said, is almost always more complicated than we want it to be. One of the women Teresa counseled in Valladolid later gave a deposition during the beatification process. She testified that Teresa had told her something she would never forget. Teresa said that the devil does not destroy marriages with one big temptation. He destroys them with 1,000 small neglects. He makes a wife believe that she has time, that she can deal with problems later, that her husband will always be there. He makes her think that the distance growing between them is normal, that passion fades for everyone, that this is just what marriage becomes after a few years. And by the time she realizes that something is desperately wrong, the damage is often irreversible. The woman testified that Teresa had looked at her with tears in her eyes and said that she had seen so many marriages die this way, not from violence, not from cruelty, but from the slow, silent poison of neglect, wrapped in the lie that everything was fine, a pattern of criticism, a withdrawal of affection, a shift from partnership to coexistence. She noted that, in most cases, both the husband and wife sensed that something was wrong, but neither had the courage to name it. They both hoped it would get better on its own. They both made excuses. They both convinced themselves that this was normal. And they both woke up one day to find that they were living with a stranger. Teresa wrote that this is the great tragedy of marriage. Not that people fail, but that they fail slowly, quietly, and then act shocked when the failure becomes visible. Not a place where they felt like failures, but a place of warmth, of acceptance, of desire, of honor. She said that a man who feels wanted at home will not seek to be wanted elsewhere. A man who feels honored at home will not seek honor in another woman's eyes. A man who feels pursued by his wife will not be vulnerable to being pursued by someone else. Teresa said that many women wait until after the betrayal to start fighting for their marriages. They wait until the crisis to finally become the wife they should have been all along. And by then, she said, it is often too late. The time to fight for a marriage is before it is in danger. The time to pursue your husband is before another woman does. The time to honor him is before he seeks honor elsewhere. Teresa died on October 4th, 1582, in the Carmelite convent at Alba de Tormes. Among her final words, recorded by the nuns at her bedside, was a plea for married women to understand that the covenant they made on their wedding day was not a one-time event. It was a daily choice, a choice to see, a choice to honor, a choice to pursue, a choice to forgive. She said that so many marriages die because people stop choosing. They assume the choice was made on the wedding day, and that is enough. But Teresa said it is not enough. It will never be enough. Marriage is a living thing, and living things die when they are neglected. Every time a wife withholds affection without cause, she betrays the covenant. Every time she speaks with contempt, she betrays the covenant. Every time she turns away from her husband's need for connection, she betrays the covenant. And if she does this long enough, she should not be shocked when he turns to someone who does not betray him. Teresa insisted this was not about excusing the husband's sin. His betrayal is his own. But she also insisted that wives must stop pretending they played no role in creating the conditions that made betrayal possible. Facing that truth is painful, but it is the only path to healing. But her teachings on marriage were quietly set aside. They were too uncomfortable, too confronting, too willing to place responsibility on both parties rather than simply condemning the guilty. It was not until the late 20th century when scholars began examining the full scope of her writings and the depositions from her beatification process that the depth of her understanding of marriage began to be recognized. What they found was a woman who had seen with terrifying clarity the patterns that destroy marriages centuries before modern psychology would name them. She saw codependency. She saw emotional neglect. She saw the weaponization of religion. She saw passive aggression. She saw the death of intimacy. and she named them all as forms of betrayal, not just the final act of infidelity, but the hundreds of small acts that led to it. In 2003, researchers at the Pontifical University in Salamanca compared Teresa's observations on marriage with modern research on marital infidelity. The patterns Teresa identified in the 16th century matched almost exactly the patterns identified by contemporary marriage researchers. The same risk factors, the same warning signs, the same progression from health to dysfunction to betrayal. Among the documents preserved in the Teresian archives is a letter Teresa wrote to a young bride in 1579. The letter was never sent. Teresa died before she could finish it, but the fragment that remains is perhaps her most concise summary of everything she had learned about marriage. She wrote that marriage is not sustained by the promises made on the wedding day. It is sustained by the promises kept every day after. Every day a wife must choose to see her husband, to honor him, to desire him, to forgive him, to pursue him. Every day she must fight against the habits that turn lovers into strangers. She must fight against silence, against coldness, against contempt, against neglect. She must fight against the lie that she has time, that she can fix things later, that he will always be there. Because he will not always be there. Not in the way that matters. Every marriage is dying or growing. There is no standing still, and the habits a wife allows today will shape the marriage she wakes up to tomorrow. Teresa ended the fragment with a single sentence. She wrote that the greatest tragedy she had witnessed in her life was not the betrayals themselves, but the fact that so many of them could have been prevented if someone had just paid attention.